Is okay. 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 All right. Now we can start. We might as well start. It's already 107. All right. Good afternoon, Co-Banker George. I thank you for coming to this lunch and learn. We are very fortunate today to have an expert in mold to tell us how to do the how we can detect and remediate the mold problems in residential and commercial real estate. And Ron McProw is probably one of the most knowledgeable guy in mold in Orange County. That's why he said that he's the detective, the mold detective. Um,
Nice.
but anyway, when I first talked to him and I find his analysis so detailed and so knowledgeable that I fire my own mold guy right on the spot and then hire him. So without further ado, let's welcome Ron. And Ron, let's
Hi.
take it away.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi. So I guess one of the first things I want to say to everybody is welcome. I appreciate you taking time to meet with me, and please don't take this personally, but don't be offended if you hear any cuss words. They slip once in a while. I don't mean them to come out. They just naturally come out. So I'm preparing you ahead of time. You may hear some bad language, so no problem. So anyway, let me tell you a little bit about what I do. So back in 2005, there was a toxic mold bill brought up to the state legislation, and there was a body of requirements that had to be met in order for this legislation to become law. And one of those things that were in place was they had mandated that there was a slush fund of something like $350,000 was to be gathered. They didn't say who was to gather it, didn't say how it was supposed to be dispersed. They just came up with this $350,000 fund that was supposed to determine what were acceptable levels of mold spores in an environment. So you got mold in your house. Everybody has mold in their house. It's a normal environment. There's mold outside, so there's mold inside. It's a give and take situation. What my classifications or what I mandate is an acceptable level is 80% inside of what's outside. So if you got 100 mold spores outside, what's acceptable level of mold spores inside is 80 out of 100. Okay. Now, when that toxic mold bill didn't come up with the money, they extended it for another year. It still didn't come up with the money. And I believe in roughly around 2007 was the last year it was extended. Now, in that toxic mold bill, there was requirements that people that did mold inspections could not do remediation and could not do restoration, as like people that did remediation couldn't do mold inspections and testing and couldn't do restoration. And same for restoration. You couldn't do mold testing and you couldn't do the remediation. Those were going to be separate entities. There was going to be licensing put in place for everyone to have a license to do this. Texas has a law in place that requires each individual remediation company to have their license. The mold inspector has to have his license. A guy that does the mold inspection and testing has to have his own different license as well. So when that law or when that legislation never became law, things just kind of went went along and went along, and then eventually just there's no laws in the place. There's the only law that's in place right now is tenants in apartment buildings. If they suspect they have mold, they can call the health department, and the health department will write a letter to the owner of the building and telling the owner that they have to address the mold problem. They don't tell them how to do it. They don't tell them what to do. They don't make a recommendation for any testing. They don't even, 9 out of 10 times, they don't even come out and do an inspection. They simply write a letter. So in saying all that, so right now in the state of California, there's no laws that pertain to mold. So let's say you have a real estate transaction, you're representing the seller of a home, and a buyer comes in and makes an offer on the house. They do their fiduciary duty, and they hire a physical home inspector. And he comes in and says, oh, there's a mold-like substance underneath the kitchen sink. There's a mold-like substance in the showers, in the main shower. And again, you don't have any knowledge of what to do about this as the owner of the building. Your real estate agent is kind of left out or left to make an assumption that it's not an issue, and it isn't really. Basically, so what I tell my clients when someone calls me like that, a real estate agent calls me and says, hey, I've got a real estate transaction. I'm representing the buyer, or I'm representing the seller. We have a problem. The physical inspector came out and observed what he called was possible mold. They hire me, I come out and do an inspection, and I basically set the guidelines of what to do with the mold and how to correct it. And that's the advantage of knowing or having that information available. It helps the real estate transaction move a lot smoother and less likely to become an issue if you hire Acme mold removal company, because unfortunately they don't have guidelines set that they have to follow. They're their own judgment call on what needs to be done. And unfortunately, because there's no licensing in this business and there's no guidelines, then it's up to them to tell their client where the mold is and what they're doing, what they're planning on doing to take it out, get rid of it. Now the problem, this is where it becomes an issue. That job that went from a couple $100 now went to thousands of dollars because there's no oversight. There's nobody watching what they're doing. They're doing exactly whatever they want. Keep in mind, remediation companies, how do they make their money? By doing the removal of the mold. Well, the more mold they remove, the more money they make. So let's stop there for a minute and let's process this information.
So Ron, I have a question. Now you mentioned there's no set guideline from the government or any agency. Now, how do you determine that you have remediated to a satisfactory level? And how do the health department judge that you have already done a good job in remediating it?
That's an excellent question. Excellent question. So, since there are no guidelines in the state of California, I can refer them back to either states that have legislation in place and laws and separation of entities, like Texas, Florida, New York. Most of these states have guidelines that say this is what you do when you have this. This is what you do when you have this situation. Is it a small job? Is it a medium job? Is it a large job? And it's all defined by square footage. There's something else I want to bring up here as well, and I'll do it in a second. But there's another key important issue that's coming to play here very soon. So since there are no guidelines, I tell my clients, I recommend that they get on EPA.gov and they look up homeowners with mold problems, how to clean up mold problems. Also, there's a PDF handbook for schools and commercial buildings. And in that PDF file, it will define what is a small job, what's a medium job, and what's a large job. And that's what I tell my clients to look up. If I've called out that it's a small job, look on EPA, and EPA guidelines will tell you exactly what needs to be done to remediate or clean up the mold issue, address it, and get rid of it. Okay.
But ordinary people don't know whether it's a small job, big job, or medium job.
Right.
And how can you prevent the remediation guy from gouging you? You know, they may over the remediate.
That's why you hire someone like me. You hire someone that only does mold inspections or mold testing. You have to do your homework. You can't just assume that that company you're calling is a legitimate above board company. Listen, my experience with these companies that do their own testing, they come in and offer a discounted price to do the remediation, and then the jobs get larger, so they're ending up making more money. And then the other thing that they do is they do their own testing. They test their work that they did. That's a conflict of interest as far as I'm concerned. You should have an independent third party do any testing for any remediation work when it pertains to mold. Okay. Now, the key that I was going to bring up is EPA is a recognized body of authority. Everyone knows who EPA is. Several years ago, they started to implement lead testing and asbestos testing. And that comes in the same kind of general guidelines of what I do when it comes to mold. I'm also experienced in lead and asbestos. And the reason that that's important is EPA stopped doing it for a little while. And I've met several contractors recently that are now implementing lead testing and asbestos testing on buildings that are older. The cutoff date is something like 82, I think. And I usually go a little bit later. I say it has to be made after 1990. And then I heard the other day from a contractor that their EPA is now mandating that all buildings that are going through any type of remodeling, extensive remodeling, not just putting a new countertop on, but say remodeling a bathroom or something like that, or a complete house, there has to be in place testing for lead and asbestos. If you don't do it, if your contractor doesn't do it, you're subject to a $30,000 a day fine through EPA. So it's important that these kinds of things need to be brought to the public's attention, as well as any real estate transactions and real estate agents. That's the information you guys need to be telling your potential clients, that these are the things you have a buyer that's coming in, wants to buy a house, loves the neighborhood, but doesn't like the style of that house, and they want to do a major remodel in it. They need to be aware of the fact that there are guidelines in place that they're going to have to start doing asbestos and lead testing, as well as any other type of environmental tests.
Yeah, and also, Ron, you mentioned that that mold is everywhere.
Correct.
And so the concentration of mold will depend on where you are located. If you're in an urban area, where you don't have a lot of plants or a lot of insects, and the mold will be a lot less than where you were in a rural area where you have open to the nature, where you have a lot of insects and pollens and flowers and mold, of course. So
Correct.
how do you now then how do you judge whether that the inside concentration is acceptable?
Yeah, again, it's an excellent question as well. There are different regions throughout Southern California. The lab that I uses takes that into consideration, and they do a monthly average acceptable level of mold spores and a yearly acceptable level of mold spores, or normally what's found in Southern California regions.
Mhm.
That's important because that's where we live. We don't live in New York. And the question I've always had with several companies is they send their lab work or they send their testing to the East Coast for analysis. And so basically that lab on the East Coast is doing their findings on the environment on the East Coast, not the West Coast. So that's a conflict of interest as well. The labs here should be used, not the labs on the East Coast. Now, what I do is, let's say we'll do a little demonstration. I come to a real estate transaction. Their physical inspectors noted that there's a mold-like substance underneath the kitchen sink. I come in, do the inspection, talk to the client. Do you want to know what kind of mold it is, or do you want to just address the problem and get it fixed? And when you're done doing the work, I'll come back and test to clear it. In most cases, that's what usually happens, is they just decide, well, we're going to move forward and get it fixed and get rid of the mold. And so I write the report that says, this is what I want done. I want you to follow my guidelines, and you give that information to the remediator. He comes out. Now he's got a guideline to follow. He can't do further work without my authorization. And that's important, because if the client doesn't have that in place, well, there's no control, there's no oversight. I'm putting oversight in place, and that's important for the customer. And so now I've established the protocol. The remediation contractor does the work that needs to be done based on my guidelines. Then I come in and do the post-clearance testing. I write a report after that. When I do that, I test the outside air. I have to have a baseline. I test inside the remediated area, usually a containment. And then I'll also take a surface sample so that I can determine if, in fact, they clean the surfaces properly. And I'll take a look at the lab results from the lab that comes here in California. It's EM Labs, by the way. And I'll look at the lab results, and as long as the counts are lower in the containment versus what they are outside, then it passes. And the same with the surfaces. If I get minimal mold growth on the surface or no mold detected, no mold growth detected, then it's considered a pass. Now the containment can come down, and the area can be restored. A contractor can go back in and put the cabinet back in, or put the wall back together, or whatever, anything like that.
Now, another issue is that different people have different level of sensitivity,
Yep.
on mold, contacts.
Yep.
So what if a person is particularly sensitive to mold, even though the level of the mold inside the containment is acceptable, but yet they said that, well, I'm still allergic to mold. Because I still have some health issues because of the mold inside. So what do you do about that?
Well, uh, there's a couple of factors that go into play with that. If it's inside the containment, he shouldn't be in the containment. That person shouldn't be in the, he or she should not be in the containment at any time that any remediation work is being done. That's why there's a containment up. A containment establishes a chamber in which any mold spores that are released into the environment is treated in that containment by a huge air scrubber. It's 500 cubic feet of air per minute that it filters the air inside that containment. So testing the containment and not getting any mold in it is good, because then I can say it's safe to take down the containment. Now, the mold outside of the containment is what his normal mold. It's his normal environment. He wouldn't normally have a reaction to that environment. He could certainly have a reaction to the environment pre-remediation. For example, he didn't do anything about fixing the sink, and there was a leak, and it continued to leak, and then he observed what looked like a mold growth there, and started maybe having some reactions. And someone like me came in and tested and found thousands and thousands of mold spores in the air that shouldn't be there. And the reason they're there is because of that sink. So to answer the question about his health concerns, any person that has issues with mold, and I deal with a lot of people. I deal with a lot of people that are directly referred to me by doctors that deal with allergies, health issues from Lyme disease, things like that. I will test their houses to make certain that their mold levels are down and to the levels that they should be, so that they're not impacted by it. So it doesn't necessarily mean that every house is going to have to go under remediation. There's other ways to correct. If you live in an area where there's a lot of high mold spores outside, because mold originates from rotting vegetation. That's where our mold comes from. So a key part of that, what are our houses made out of? Our houses are made out of 2x4s. That's a tree. That's vegetation. You can go into any Lowe's, Home Depot, any hardware store that has lumber, and you can find mold on the lumber. You can find mold in your own house right now. Look up in the attic. There's mold on the surfaces of a lot of wood. Okay. Where it becomes an issue is when water's introduced. When water gets into an environment like a kitchen sink, or a shower's leaking, or there's some other issue where water's coming in, you got a bad faulty roof, and you've had several, we had a lot of rain last year. A lot of people had water damage from their roofs being bad. They did get enough introductions of water that they potentially could get mold. Now, my philosophy or my training has been, if it's allowed to stay wet for longer than 2 weeks, you're likely to have mold growth. If it's a single introduction of water, like you have a flood, your toilet backs up and it floods the floor and it seeps into the walls a little bit, that's not an issue as far as I'm concerned. It's a single introduction of water. It'll dry out, it'll be fine. But normally, where you have long-term introductions of water, where it keeps dripping and dripping and dripping, and no one addresses it, they don't fix it, and a couple months later, they look underneath the sink and they find a whole bunch of mold. That is where there could potentially be a health risk, not only to a sensitive person, to anyone. Anyone can have a reaction. In theory, the types of molds we find, one of the most common molds is Aspergillus penicillium. It's penicillin. It's penicillin mold. And in theory, if somebody's allergic to penicillin, if they walk into an environment that has a lot of penicillin mold, Aspergillus penicillin mold in the air, they could have a reaction in theory. It'd have to be a lot of mold spores, but in theory, it could happen. So I think I answered your question. I probably rattled off a little bit too much, but yeah, I think I got.
Ron, I have a question. This is Camelia. So is bleach the answer?
Oh my God, that is an excellent question. No, 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 no. And the reason I say that, a couple of years ago, EPA used to say on, this is probably about 10 years ago, EPA used to say on their webpage, use a bleach diluted solution to clean up mold. And my lab, EM Labs, it was called PK Labs then, did a test. And they tested some of the areas that were cleaned by bleach. And what they found was it didn't kill the mold, it bleached it out. So when they were looking under a microscope, they saw the outline of the mold, but it wasn't dead. They did a viable growth culture and it grew. The bleach didn't kill it. So no, it is not what. And so an EPA changed that. They said, well, okay, we're not recommending bleach anymore. And one of the reasons I don't recommend bleach at all is bleach should never be used on a porous surface. And most everything around our house is porous. Your tile, your grout, your walls, about the only thing that isn't porous is glass. And you can use it to clean glass, but I don't recommend you use it at all. The other issue is with bleach, it's usually, the recommendations are a 1/4 cup of bleach per 1 gallon of water. That's a concentration level you should be using. And most people think, well, hey, 1/4, hell, I'll put a 1/2 gallon in there and it'll be super strong and it'll kill everything on the surface. Yeah, it's going to burn your lungs when you do it. And you're going to cause yourself more health issues than the mold was causing you because you burned yourself by trying to use bleach to clean it. I recommend a product that is easily available online, Home Depot, Lowe's department. I think it's just about available anywhere nowadays. And that product is, the name of it is Concrobium. And I'll text you guys. I'll send some information over to Ruben and you guys can look it up. It's made from, it's a food grade product, which is designed, the key to this is it kills mold. It actually kills the mold, but also it doesn't have water in it. And the last thing you want to do in a moldy environment is add water to it, because that's exactly what the element it's missing. In most cases, when mold's growing, the one key thing that will keep mold from growing in a house or anywhere else for that matter, no water. If it doesn't have water, it's not going to grow. And that's the key to it. Get rid of the water and you won't have mold in your environment. Cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Someone give me a situation that they've had to deal with in the past.
Well,
Talk to me.
hello. Hi.
Hi.
My name is Irma Sid, and
Hi, Irma.
how you doing? Recently, about a couple of months, one of my friends called me because recently I've been telling people I have my real estate license.
Shut it off. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Hey, Irma. Yes, I can.
Okay, so a friend reached out to me because they call me for everything now. Ever since people are finding out I have a real estate license, they think I know
Yeah.
everything. I don't know everything, but just to let you know what happened, she lives in an apartment complex in Pasadena. She's a retired city employee, and there was mold in the kitchen, mold in one of the bedrooms, and she was telling me, Irma, they only want to give me like 500 credits towards, my rent, and then they want to eventually replace the rug. And I said, no, they have to do more than that. I said, call the health department. She goes, I did. And I said, okay, let me make some calls. So anyways, that because I used to work for the city, so I made some calls. Finally, they went to visit, and they told them, you have to move out of this place. They have to get you a place to move, and so you could, so they could clean all this things. But she kept complaining for months. Anyways,
Yeah.
now she's suing, and it's actually one of my son's friends that's an attorney and deals with mold. My question,
Where'd you go?
had to go to court. Can you hear me?
I
Can you hear
can.
me?
Go ahead.
Hello?
I do. Yes.
Hello? Have you ever been to court where you had to be at court to testify against what you found
Yes. Yes.
in regards to the mold?
I have. Yes. And unfortunately, since there are no laws in the state of California, there's very few lawyers that will take mold cases anymore. In a situation with a tenant, Pasadena is a different story. Pasadena has their own laws in place where they deal with moldy issues in apartments. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay. So I can testify on behalf of a client, but there has to be, I have to come in and for me to testify, I have to come in and create a chain of custody. And what that means is I have to come in, do the inspection, do the testing, get the lab results, use an accredited lab, not some Shylock lab or someone that comes out and does their own analysis. And then at that point, if I end up going to court for that client, then I give testimony as to what I found, how I obtained the information, and the chain of custody is follows. It goes to my lab. I do an analysis. I have a PhD that does the follow-up analysis for me in a criminal suit, civil suit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and this is the thing, they wanted to give her a settlement without the attorney. They
Yeah.
wanted to give her only like $15,000. Keep in mind, my friend already has issues with her lungs,
Yeah.
and this even worsened her situation. So, my friend is of course she's not going to take no settlement for 15,000. So her attorney said, who specializes in, hey, we could take this to trial.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on right now.
Yeah. Likely it'll go to arbitration and it'll probably be settled out of arbitration. But if it does go to court, it could take years for that to happen. Just so you're aware of that.
Isn't there a statute of limitation where they have to settle this within 5 years?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I don't think there is a yeah, I think that if she can show cause that
And which
there's
she
Go ahead.
got tested that it did affect her health.
Did she get blood tests and urine tests and all that? She did
everything.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, she needs all that to go to court with, for sure.
Now this is a company that owns a lot of apartment buildings.
Yeah.
It's an LLC, so yeah, just wanted to ask you that. It's
Sure.
yeah, and a lot of
Yeah.
the tenants there, they also have mold, but they're too afraid to come forward. She's the only one
Yeah.
she asked. You know, it's there's power in numbers, but most of them have lived there a long time, and they were happy with
Ye-
getting a $500 credit.
I hear you. Yeah, the only thing that's going to change the current situation with the laws, because the health
Mhm.
department is a waste of time and money. It's a waste of their time and your money and time, as far as I'm concerned, because they don't do anything. They really don't. They don't have authorization to do anything.
Well,
The
it
the
did
only
help.
Yeah, I agree. It will help on occasion. Now, Pasadena is a different situation, though.
Yeah.
Outside of you go down to LA, it's different. The health department won't even
Oh,
come out.
yeah.
I've got several clients down in Orange County. They have situations. I got one in Tustin and one in Irvine. They live in apartments, and the city of Orange or Orange County is not doing anything. They're not responding. They're not even sending the health department out there. Won't send them out.
Wow. Well, they're
Yeah,
probably
so
overwhelmed with a lot of cases in comparison to Pasadena.
it's possible, but because there's no laws, they're kind of just like, why did you throw that on us? We don't want to deal with that. Get your own legislation, get licensing. I know it's not going to make any difference, but if you were to contact your representative and ask them and demand, why don't we have laws in the state of California to deal with mold, then these situations would go away. But
Yeah.
they'd have some footings. These kinds of situations where if a person has mold in an apartment, the landlord would be required immediately to address it and to correct the situation immediately instead of years. That's what I find most of the time is these situations linger on for years and years, and people just end up giving up on it. That's what
Yeah.
they're counting on.
Yeah. Well, I know my friend's not gonna give up
Good,
give up on him, and
good,
I'm being her cheerleader on this.
right on.
But
Okay,
okay, I believe in justice.
good. All
Okay,
right,
well,
Airman. Nice,
thank you so much.
you bet. Nice talking to you. Is that it? I think we got disconnected.
This is Camelia. I have another question. Is
Yeah, Camelia.
is a black surface always mold? So for example, you go in and you see a property and then you look at the faucet and you see that the around the faucet, it's got these little black spots. So
Yeah.
is that always mold? And is that something where, I mean, we have to have a full-blown inspection, or is that something where we just throw a blow dryer on it?
No, a lot of times it's algae. What happens is algae, when it dies, it turns black. And that's very common around sinks. Algae is a very common occurrence around sinks on the countertops. Typically on granite countertops, I see it a lot. And the other issue is a lot of the countertops are the joints are caulking. They're put caulking on it, and that caulking is a food source, and an algae will grow on it as well. Sometimes it can be mold, but most often it's algae. And then once it dies, it turns black. So it looks like black mold, but it's not. Yeah.
So algae is not a mold then?
No, it is not.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So for the physical inspection, you should routinely request for mold inspection. Would you?
I didn't hear you. Say that
I
again.
said for physical inspection, we always do a physical inspection report in a
Right.
residential purchase. Should we always ask for the mold detection?
I'm not selling my business, Peter. That is not what I'm after here. But I think in most cases, I would highly recommend that you do a mold inspection, because what I look for I'm looking for environments that are going to create mold. Okay. If there's a situation that's there, now's the time to deal with it before it becomes a major problem. Because the biggest thing that can occur with mold or having mold in a situation in a real estate transaction, person buys it, moves into the house, didn't realize that there was a mold problem. Excuse me. And then they either have an odd smell, they've got this weird smell, and they start doing some research and they go, oh my God, look at this mold all over in this closet. How did this happen? And then you try to go back to the seller. Hey, we didn't know we had mold in this house. And they're going, well, you should have done a mold inspection. That's not our problem. You did a physical inspection. Why didn't your physical inspector tell you? Well, that's not, that's the other thing. A physical inspector, his job is to check the other issues in a house, your electrical, your HVAC system, your plumbing, and he's limited on what he can do to do a thorough inspection on that. If I was doing real estate transactions, my recommendation to a buyer would be I'd hire my own roofing contractor, I'd hire my own electrical contractor, I'd hire my own plumbing contractor to come out and do an inspection on the house that I was buying. Because a physical inspector is limited on what he can do and in experience and his ability. He doesn't have the tools to do a lot of the things that would be uncovered by having that specialist contractor there. And doing a mold inspection is not a guarantee that you're not going to run into a mold problem, but it definitely, in the scope of the big picture, I think it ends up saving you money, because if you can find it at the time that you're doing the negotiations, that's the time you want to deal with it, not after it's done, the transaction's done, and you try to do something. Likely you're probably not going to get anything if you try. So yes, I highly recommend you do a real mold inspection on every transaction, be it commercial or residential, don't matter, or
So
industrial.
So it's up to the buyer, not to the seller.
Correct.
The
Yeah,
seller will
and
just disclose that you have the right for inspection, and you have to do your due diligence. And if you want to find a mold,
Yep.
Inspection, then you have to order it yourself.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I tell my clients, because this is the situation at hand that we're dealing with right now. I tell my clients, when I get a person that calls me, real estate agent calls me and says, I've got a seller that's selling their house and they want to do a mold inspection, I tell them not to do it. Don't do a mold inspection. Why would you do that? Because number one, it's not their job to tell the buyer what the condition of their house is. The buyer, it's his responsibility or their responsibility to do their inspections and due diligence to determine what's going on with that vehicle, the car, your house. So if a seller says to me, we want to do an inspection anyway, now I commend them, because first of all, they're upfront. And I really do appreciate people that are upfront when it comes to real estate transactions. I want to know if I do have a problem. It also helps to protect me in case they bring in their own mold inspector and he makes all these not legitimate claims. And I said, yeah, I got you. I got one in Chino Hills. The physical inspector mandated that there was a whole bunch of mold up in the attic, and my client, the seller, hired me. I went out, did the inspection, and wrote the report. That's lumber mold. That's not mold. It's lumber mold. It's a whole different category. And then, and plus, I asked him where he got his documentation to even say that it was mold. He's not qualified to make that determination. He's not like a person like me. He's a physical inspector. Physical inspectors that do their own mold inspections, that's another thing you don't want. You don't want a physical inspector that does mold inspections. It's conflict of interest. I don't do physical inspections when I go out to do a mold inspection. I might mention something that I see that might, help out the client a little bit, but for the most part, I stay out of that. That's not my business. I'm not opening and closing doors to make sure they lock or open correctly. That's not my job. I'm looking for mold. I'm going to find it. If it's there, I'm finding it.
Ron, this is
Yeah.
Camille again. I have another question. So how much would you say is a mold inspection for a basic 2,000 square foot house, 3-bedroom, 2-bath?
Excellent. I charge my fee, my preliminary inspection fee is $325. And that's right around, I think my invoice says 1,500, but I go up to about roughly around 4,000 feet. After 4,000 feet, there's increments that I go up a little bit on it to, I think it's, I can't remember I think it's $75 for each additional 1,000 square feet. So if I go out to a 10,000 square foot house, it's going to be more than 325, but it's not, it's based on my initial preliminary inspection is 325 for me to come out.
And my other question is, say you're not available, what should we be looking for in a mold inspector to hire one? What credentials, what background?
Good. Excellent question. Excellent question. Anyone that you call that says, can you come out and do a mold inspection for me? Sure. Do you do the work too? Yes, we do the work too. That's not who you hire. Do not hire any person that does remediation and inspections together. Okay. The reason I say that is because, like I was saying earlier today, is if you find out you have mold and you don't know what to do or who to hire, you look online and these companies will say they do a free mold inspection. Well, right there, you already got, that's an issue. Nobody does anything for free. So they come out, they'll tell you, well, we have to test to see if it's mold. We'll charge you minimum fee $150 for the testing or something to that effect. And then, but if you choose to hire us, we'll absorb that fee in our pricing. That if that isn't a switch and bait kind of deal, I don't know what else is. I don't know how to define it. That's certainly shoddy business practice. You know what I mean? So since I don't make any money doing remediation, I have no monetary value with the end result of what happens after I do the inspection. So, yeah.
And what about qualifications? Should they have any kind of background?
Well, that's a pretty good question, because technically, since there are no licenses that are available, there are quite a few people that will take many different classes online and get certifications. I think there are several companies that I've seen that have a lot of certifications that seem to be overwhelming. Like, what does all that mean? But there are a couple of different qualifications. Water restoration, I would say, would be a main certification, and I think it's a IRCI or something like that international water restoration certification. If they have any kind of water certification, water restoration certifications, then they're pretty knowledgeable about what to do when it comes to dealing with mold.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's a couple of certified indoor environmental certifications, but they really don't. They're not recognized as a legitimate certification. There are no certifications here, so unfortunately. But if you like, for example, like if you go to Texas and you look up their qualifications, there are these kinds of classes that you have to take, and you have to become certified in those classes. And that's the lacking that we have here. I wish it would come to fruition here. We could easily just take out Texas and put it in California, and we could have a law here, and that would help a lot of situations. I can't tell you how many clients I've dealt with over the last 20 plus years that didn't do a mold inspection or didn't have a mold guy like myself come out, and ended up, the horror stories are just incredible what happens. So yeah, good question.
Here's my second question. Since you only do inspections, how do we find a good remediation company that's not going to, that's
Yeah.
legitimate?
There's basically what I tell my clients is there's several different people that I recommend out. If they're not available or if they don't want to deal with them, then I suggest that they do their own investigation and hire or get an estimate from someone, and then just please tell me who it is. And I have a lot of experience with a lot of different companies, and I can tell you whether that's a company you want to use or not use. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, very good. Well, you're right on time, Ron.
All right.
Now, yeah. Is there any more question for Ron?
Peter,
Yes.
so I'll send out Ron's information, contact
Okay.
information, via email, along with this recording.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. If there's no more questions, then I would like to thank Ron to come to talk to us today. Thank you very much, Ron. It was very insightful and educational. So
Very good. And I think I got through the whole thing without one cuss word.
yeah.
I think. I know, sure. Yeah, watch the
Yeah,
video
you got
again. Make
any-
sure.
I didn't hear no bad words.
Right on. Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All
Thank
right.
you.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Have a good day,
Bye-bye.
man.
Have a,
Okay.
yeah.